All right, Jason. So chasing the wind. Why did you want to call today's show Chasing the Wind?
I've thought, and I was inspired by this verse in Ecclesiastes 2:11. This is so poetic. He says, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Almost like, something's just out of reach. It's just slipping through your fingertips. And what really spurred this, though, I was in a men's group that I participated in, a study group, and we were looking at a Psalm of David. And David was this really successful king, but he had all these trials and these hardships, but maybe one of the most influential kings of all times. And his life is very well documented. Most people know him as David that defeated the giant Goliath. And, that's a story that even if you don't know anything about the Bible, most people kind of know this, the David and Goliath, the small guy going against the big opponent that just seems like there's no way to win. So most people know that story. But I was thinking about David, and I was like, man, here's this guy. He went through all this toil, all this turmoil, and he's so successful that he leaves this incredible wealth to his son. And his son was the next king, King Solomon. And it was King Solomon that wrote this book of Ecclesiastes, where he says, it was all a chasing after the wind. And what's interesting, Emilia, is and this kind of epiphany that I had as I was thinking about this was, here's this man who inherited this great wealth. Now, King Solomon is considered to be the wealthiest person to have ever lived. Some of the stories say that he had 300 wives and 700 concubines, and everything was this really meticulous, beautiful gold and just all the jewels you could imagine. I mean, just really, really wealthy. He wanted for nothing, had everything he could ever imagine. And in his book, this book of wisdom that he wrote, it starts out with everything is meaningless.
Everything is meaningless.
Everything is meaningless, yeah. And as you think, well, if you think about that language, though, that is language that we would attribute or associate with somebody that's really struggling with their mental health. I would. Somebody that's really maybe going through some depression, like nothing matters, everything's meaningless. And so I started thinking about this in the context of some of the planning that we do for people, because one of the questions we like to ask folks is, if you, what's the purpose of this money? Why do you have it? And for some people, it's really important to leave money to the next generation and to try to leave as much as possible to the next generation. And so one of the things I think about there are, what are the consequences of that potential gift? If you knew that leaving a lot of wealth to the next generation meant that they were going to have to struggle with depression or discontent, or having this language in their life where everything is meaningless because you've made life too easy for them, how would that change how you, or what you did with your money while you were alive? And would it be as important to leave that money? And so it's not that there's a right answer here. I'm not saying people shouldn't leave anything to their kids, because that's not the case. But it's just really more of trying to wrap our mind around what are the implications, what are the consequences? Because sometimes when we think we're helping people, we think we're making their life easier. What we're seeing here is that maybe that's not the case. Maybe it's actually there's always going to be trials, but maybe it's just the trials are different. And so I know that one of the greatest things I've been able to experience is the opportunity to learn to be successful in life. And for my wife and I, we did it. I shouldn't say we did it on our own, because there's a lot of people that supported us. I had a great mentor and a good family growing up, but we didn't do it because people were giving us money. And that's something that we've been really proud of, that we've been able to go out and learn to be successful without having to accept gifts from other people. So anyway, it's just something to ponder and think about as we dive into this chasing after the wind.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that, Jason. That's great. So I know you've been thinking about these verses. So will you share some of the questions you have for our listeners?
Yes. Well, another one, and this is also in Ecclesiastes, this is one other one that I was thinking about, is Ecclesiastes 5:10 says, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. this too is meaninless. This poor guy, King Solomon. I mean, people want to think, oh man, if I had everything King Solomon had, then I'd be happy. If I had the Tesla, if I had the waterfront house, if I had, whatever the case may be, if I could take my grandkids all on a trip to Hawaii, if I could make sure that my grandkids never had to work a day in their life because we left them so much money. You get these ideas in your head about when you would be content, or when would enough be enough. So some of the questions that I've been thinking about around this is, the first one is just, we kind of hit on it already, but if you knew that leaving a lot of money to the next generation caused depression or discontent, how would that change how you used your money today?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, along these same lines of kind of asking the question and wanting to know what it means to be content. I love this other verse here in Philippians 4:11. The author says, I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. So the good news here is that this is a skill that we can learn. To be content is something that we can learn to do, is what the Bible's telling us in this verse, and what the author's telling us. But the second question I have around this, and these are questions we want to get our listeners thinking. We don't want to provide them with answers. We want to provide them with better questions. But the second question is, how much is enough? You see, the interesting thing about this is I have met with people that have saved $10 million, and I've met with people that have saved $500,000. And everybody has the same question, which is, have we saved enough, and are we going to be okay? Because what happens along that journey to saving and investing $10 million, for most people, the people that actually make it on their own, not the people that inherited it, but the people that make it on their own, what happens is their lifestyle tends to increase as that wealth accumulates. And so you tend to spend more. And so if you've saved $10 million, but you're spending $600,000 a year to keep up with this lifestyle that you've created for yourself, well, then you have to ask the question, how much is enough? When are we going to plug up that hole that says we can be content? We don't need to spend $600,000 a year to have the fulfillment and the joy and the happiness that we're looking for. Yeah. The next question is, what are some moments where you feel wealthy? What are some of the moments where you feel wealthy? Now, I want to share a quick story, because when I was going to college, I had a carpool, and the school I was attending was about an hour away. And so we had to drive an hour there and an hour back. And so there were 4 of us we found that were all going to the same school, and we could carpool together. And I was meticulous about keeping my car just really nice. I mean, I always washed it and I always vacuumed it out. I mean, I just loved having a really nice car, and I had a really nice CD deck in the car for listening to music. And so I was the one most of the time many times I'd be driving. And I remember I got an Exxon Mobil gas card in college, and it had a $400 limit. And I would, I'd pull into Exxon in the morning, I'd fill up that gas tank, and I'd walk in and I'd buy a mocha. And of course, I would ask everybody in the car, hey guys, can I get you anything? And but I remember just feeling so wealthy when I could fill up my gas tank. And what ended up happening is I ended up charging that Exxon gas card all the way up to the max, $400. And I was bussing tables at a Mexican food restaurant to kind of keep the lights on and be able to afford to live. So I wasn't making a lot of money. And next thing I know, $400, trying to pay that off became this insurmountable expense. And so today, when I go to the gas station and I pay cash with my prepaid debit card, that instead of, we used to do cash in envelopes, now we do prepaid debit cards. And one of these days I need to do a webinar on that, because we've had a lot of people ask me how I've done that. But when I can fill up my gas tank and know that I paid cash for it, I feel this real sense of being wealthy, because I remember what it was like to be at a time where I had maxed out my gas card and being a college student, just struggling to get by. And so that was one of my times. What about for you, Emilia? When is a time where you feel like, wow, life is financially, we're pretty good, when we can...
Very similar, I guess I could say, because now living further from my family, I travel back and forth. And so for the first time, being able to plan that trip and get my flight and not have to charge it on a credit card, I was like, oh my gosh. I'm like, wow, I get to see my family and it's not going to hurt me financially.
And you feel kind of wealthy.
Yeah, it was good. It made me feel really good. So that was something very similar.